Hello CIS27. In this video I'm going to talk about Lab 4, which is what we have to do for this week. In this week we're going to work on wireless, looking at domain name systems, looking at different types of attack, and malicious code or script execution. So in this lab you would start with looking at the topology and the required virtual machines. And you need to enable the pop-up blocker in order to start your virtual machine. So for the wireless section, it talks about different type of wireless devices and attack. And an evil twin is where we would have a rogue wireless access point that would be added to the network. A common tool that's used for the evil twin is Wi-Fi Pineapple. I discussed this in my lecture where you would see one would be able to acquire the Wi-Fi Pineapple from using Hack5. And the rogue access point is an unauthorized access point, and sometimes that can be physically connected to a switch on purpose, so that way they can put they would attach something to that wireless access point. So we wanted to be able to control that by closing or disabling the port that we don't use on the switch or the device, our network devices. And in the next section, it talks about threats, Bluetooth devices like bluejacking, blue snifing, blue snarfing, or war nibbling. So these are some of the terminology that you need to be familiar with in the case where you're looking at Bluetooth threats or Bluetooth devices that might be exposed to these type of threats, and that might come up on the Security Plus certification. Jamming is to use signal to disrupt a certain type of reader, and that could be for radio frequency reader, it could be for signal reader. So in order to have a denial of service attack, they can also generate a jamming attack where it would cause the device to be very occupied with the signal as the device is intercepting or receiving the signal. Radio frequency identifier is used for different things like door access, to be able to track shipping or different types of products in the store. And radio frequency, with the attack for radio frequency, often would be eavesdropping, replay. They could sniff out the traffic. Interception, that would be for man in the middle. Clone that particular type of device, cards, or things that would use the RFID. Or even spoof is to make a false secondary part or the card for that particular system. Near field communication is often used with remote control, things that would be wireless devices, and all smartphones have the NFC capability, but it should be disabled when you don't use it. This is used to be able to have two devices communicate, for file sharing or be able to distribute file, to be able to control one over the other. And the way that they would attack NFC is through eavesdropping, man in the middle, or to be able to modify the data once it's intercepted. Initialization Vector Iv is commonly used in wireless attack, in that they would try to sniff out the wireless traffic by looking at the packet, and when packets are sent with the same IV, it can be used to decrypt the key stream, so that way they would be able to build up the decryption table by evaluating multiple packets and use the packet's IV information to decrypt your wireless connection. So it's often known as the IV attack. Now for DNS, as we touched on this last week, a DNS stands for Domain Name System. It's a way that we would be able to establish our domain. All web servers is connected to a domain, and that domain will allow a certain system to be connected using the mapping of IP address to the actual fully qualified domain name. So in order for the system to be part of the network, that system needs to be joined to the domain, and based on that we can centralize the control of that system. And in the domain there could be possibility of different type of attacks, such as domain hijacking, poisoning, spoofing, and depending on the type of services and the vulnerability on that network. So for the DNS exercise, you will need to have the BDC1, which is the first server, the Windows 10, that will be the client system, and this shows you how to set up your domain hijack and DNS poisoning and spoofing attacks. So here it talks about different type of attacks, and then to be able to achieve some of those attacks, often that you would see the client would be rerouted or redirected, so that way there's no suspicion. And in the first task, what you're going to do is you are going to verify the domain reputation. So you are going to use Windows 10 and make sure that we are using the appropriate virtual machines. Then you are going to open up Microsoft Edge, which is the browser for that, and you are going to put in this website. Once you're at that website, what you will find is you will find website. You are going to set up where it would be that you would have the reputation lookup for Google. Then you're going to look up that particular domain, which is Google, and then it's going to allow you to check for that particular domain. With that information, you are going to look at the middle of the web page, and that's going to give you the information for the domain reputation. Now, this would pertain to email history, some volume regarding email. We are going to leave the devices on. So for lab exercise 3, what we'll do is we are going to generate a denial of service attack. In this one, you need to use Kali Linux, Windows 10, and the server. And keep in mind that if in the case where a lot of people are using these machines, sometimes it can slow down or it becomes unavailable. So in such case, be patient with the actual lab that you need to do. So the beginning, it talks about man in the browser, and this attack would be using some kind of malware like a Trojan, and a Trojan is used because it looks like a regular application, but it would contain malicious code within. So that would trick the user in accessing the attachment and download the Trojan to the system, which would then impact the system, and it would install or send user email information, and it would, once it's installed itself as an extension for the web browser, then the user would leak information through that Trojan or that malware. So for man-in-the-middle attack is a type of attack that intercepts communication between systems or users. And man-in-the-middle is often performed with other type of attack, such as impersonation, using it with poisoning, redirecting the systems. So they would need to clone or impersonate a system. And spoofing is often used to use a fake MAC address or an IP address to impersonate another system that would be trusted to the network. So for task 1, this walks you through on how to set up the MAC flooding. And when they do the MAC flooding, you're going to use MACoff tool, which is used for the fake MAC address. This tool sends a list of MAC addresses to the switch device, which then would compare the address from the table and be able to perform MAC flooding in that it would not recognize the real or the fake MAC address. Then when you use Kali Linux, if at the highest level, that will be your root user, and this root user would log in, so that way you would have the highest privilege. But in most cases, for security practices, we don't use administrator or root. We only use this for testing purposes. Okay, so once the user is logged in, then you are going to open a terminal. And for Linux, terminal is a command line where you can issue commands for execution of specific tasks. So here is where we would install DNS-sniff. And in Linux, you simply, depending on the version, if you're logged on as root, you can say apt-get install DNS-sniff. If you're logged on as other user, you would have to issue the sudo in some of the Linux versions. So for Kali Linux, since you're logged on as the highest level user, then we can install DNS-sniff. Keep in mind that not all user accounts are allowed to be installing application. So make sure that we input the appropriate syntax, meaning that don't check for typo if it's giving you an error and such. So once the DNS-sniff start, then what you can do is you can wait for the installation. Then you can clear the screen, and once that's done, you can use MACoff. And this command is using on top of the Ether1, which is the Ethernet interface card for the virtual machine, to send out a number of 100 MAC addresses. So what we can do is we can generate a numerical count for different MAC addresses to that table. The second task is going to allow you to use Yersinia, and Yersinia is also another tool in Kali Linux. It shows you how you can call up that application by using the option G with the application name. So at this point, what you're going to do is you are going to look at the interface of this, and so this is going to show the alpha version like the screenshot. Then you are going to go into the interface, and you'll be able to click and navigate through the interface to launch the attack. Once that's established, you're going to choose the type of attack, and you're going to choose the flooding CDP table. So earlier you saw that in the previous part we used MACoff, which allows us to send a list of MAC addresses to the switch and let us know that even one of the unauthorized address that's on that list, it should be accepted. Then the flooding CDP table, we can use Yersinia, and on this one you can launch the attack through the graphical user interface instead of using command line. Then for step 6 and 7, in step 7, it's going to list the attacks, and then we're going to run the attacks. Now on the interface, you should be able to see whether the attack has launched or not. And once it's launched, if you need to stop it in the step, it shows you that you can stop the attack. So as you complete that, you would go through and establish what we would see as a MAC flooding attack in 2 different ways. Then for task 3, you are going to do a SYN flood attack, and SYN flood often is related to packets itself. SynFlood can generate denial of service attack to disrupt communication between systems. So in Kali Linux, you would then go back to the command line or the terminal, and you can use hping. Which hping, you would then point to the target address, which is 192.168.0.3, and then you also include the flood options. So the target address goes first, and the attacker address is going to go second. Now in Linux, if you put in help, it's also going to give you additional details about a certain set of commands. So when hping starts, it's going to go into the flood mode. It's going to show you that it's being executed. So like this, hping in flood mode. Then after that, what we need to do next is we are going to open up Wireshark, and this is a network monitoring tool. It allows you to see all the activities that are happening on the network. And in order to have the SynFlood attack successfully executed, we also need to look at the ongoing traffic that is happening in our network. So Wireshark is then launched, and in Wireshark you simply just pick the interface that are you using for that system. Some system might have multiple network interface, like a wireless adapter along with an Ethernet adapter, and that's often what you see with mobile laptops and such. So once you select the adapter, then you can start capturing, and you can click the blue fin on the left corner, which allows you to begin to capture. And since there has been a launch with the SynFlood, you should be able to recognize that. So in step 5, it's going to show that the packets for the Syn packets is being sent from 192.168.0.3. And you can click each of the packet to really evaluate the content of the packet. You can also categorize the protocols by name or port. So in Windows 10, in that case, after you started seeing some traffic that was generated, then you can look at the packets in Wireshark. Now, after that, once you're going to evaluate the packets from Wireshark, then you're going to switch over to Kali Linux, and you are going to keep the SynFlood attack going. So the whole point is to show that you can identify if there's an attack that's occurring by using network monitoring tool. Additional to that, if you're looking at from an attacker standpoint, right, this would be utilizing the communication between two systems, but at the same time, another system can monitor the network and be able to detect that. So we wanted to use some kind of spoofing to cover the track, but yet at the same time, you want to make sure that that other system doesn't recognize the real identity of the system that has been spoofed. So then we would do a kill command to stop, and back into Wireshark for step 9. In this, what you can do is you can then evaluate the packets and return back to the desktop. In task 4, you are going to use Windows Firewall on Windows 10 system. And what it's going to do is it's going to bring you to the steps where you would enable the Windows Firewall or reconfigure the Windows Firewall. So here is in step 3, we are going to turn the Windows Firewall on. And once they're on, it's going to show the green. then we're going to customize the setting for the firewall with the private, the public, and the domain area of our systems. So if it's off for the domain, it would show red like this in the screenshot. Now if we turn it off, what will happen is that it's not going to be able to block anything that could be potentially harming the system itself or raising an alarm at least. So Windows Firewall, then we would now go back and we would perform a ping or an Icmp flood attack. And I call this a Smurf attack. So in this, what you will do is you will generate the attack from another system and wanted to see if you will be able to pick that up with the network monitoring tool, which is Wireshark. So turn on Wireshark again, capture the packet, and if we have attack that's ongoing, we should be able to see it. After you turn on the Wireshark, then you would then go back to Kali Linux. We're going to do a clear and then run hping 3. Now the option for this is we're going to do an hping count 100, and here's the protocol for ping, which is Icmp, and then our target IP. And now once that's generated, the packet's going to be sent. So it's going to send ping for 100 times. And on the Wireshark interface, we should be able to detect the same activity that's happening. And so when Kali Linux generated 100 packets, then on the Wireshark side, it's also going to record that. And in order for that to be successfully launched, we have to disable the Windows firewall. Then for 6 is going to talk about ping of death. And so this one would require the server system and make sure that we're using the right one, which is the DMO1. And in the DMO1, you are going to run the command prompt by doing run as administrator cmd. So then we would start pinging our target from the server system, which is 192.168.0.3, and we also generate ping traffic on that could be seen from the network monitoring tool, which is Wireshark. And again, make sure that we input the right command. If you have errors, just check for typo or syntax. Then with the ping command would then also be open in Windows 10. We're going to generate the ping. And then next, we are going to look at the details in our task manager to see if our performance has changed. So there should be a peak in the processor and also the Ethernet connectivity. So task manager is also a good way to really look at the system health and the network health that pertains to that system, how it's connected. So after looking at the Ethernet connectivity from the task manager, then you would go through and you would start to conducting the ARP poisoning attack. And like earlier, any form of attack will be generating from Kali Linux because this is the operating system that's equipped with different type of tools. So using the tool for man-in-the-middle attack, excuse me, we would then run the sniffing and spoofing Ethernet graphical, which is another tool that we can use to evaluate or monitor network traffic. So from the Kali Linux side, we can run the ettercap. And on the Windows side, then you would then run command prompt. And in command prompt concurrently, what we're going to do is we are going to look at the ARP information of our system by doing ARP-A. So after issuing ARP-A, you will get a list of different MAC addresses, or the physical addresses that the system is connected to. Then at the same time, you are going to switch over to Kali Linux, and then you're going to scan for hosts. So what this is going to do is it's going to go and look for hosts that are connecting. It's going to give you the host list, and that might take a little bit of time depending on the connection. So after that, it's going to give you the list of your host identity, which is in MAC addresses as well. So from an attacker standpoint, in the Kali Linux system, they can also scan for the host to be able to identify the MAC address of the hosts that are connecting. Or from the client standpoint, we can look at ARP-A to be able to give ourselves a list of the MAC addresses or physical addresses that are connected system. Then back to the Kali Linux, you're going to look at the targets, and with the target tab, we are going to look at target 1. So we are going to input in 192.168.1.0.2. So in that case, in ettercap, we would single out a specific system by inputting its address. And from target 1, we would then add that particular address for our target. Then again, you would do the same thing for target 2. And in target 2, we would do 192.168.0.3 and then click OK on ettercap. Then after the targets have been added, then you would next perform ARP poisoning. So at this point, what you're going to do is you're going to click on Man in the Middle Attack menu, so your M, and you are going to select ARP poisoning. So this particular tool allows you to utilize the interface and select specific type of attack, and it gives you the option on the right hand side here. Not all tools will have graphical user interface. Most of the Linux-based tool is in command line. So as you select those options, then you're going to set up the sniff remote connection as well, and then click OK. So what it's going to do is going to identify or use the target that you have set for the attack. Then in Windows 10, you are going to run ARP-A again. And you're going to see that the MAC address of 192.168.0.2, it's going to end up as 32. So in Kali Linux, then we're going to go ahead and find our IP address for the Ethernet adapter. And then in Windows, we are going to look at the MAC address for the Windows from Kali Linux, and also how the Kali MAC address ended up with the .32 at the end. So what this does is it allows you to use an interface to launch an attack, to first actually look at the MAC addresses for the connected system, then set up the target, then set up the type of attack that we wanted to launch, look at the output from the attack, and then lastly, you would then use the plugins. So with the plugins, you can select the type of results that you wanted to use, and in this case we selected for the CHK Poison plugin tab. And in that, it's going to give you the group information with the MAC address and the ARP cache for the system. And ARP is important because it's used to be able to pinpoint the specific system on the network from an IP address to it correlate the IP address to the MAC. So therefore it has to establish that table, and that table is stored. So for the attacker, they would then utilize this information to be able to, cause harm to the system, let's say. And in such that you would see these type of tools being used to test the system or to be able to attack the system. For exercise 4, this one shows you on how to look at script and script's execution. And in Windows environment, we would use PowerShell. From Pro to the Enterprise for Windows 10, you would see that it's equipped with PowerShell. For the server 2019 for Windows is also equipped with PowerShell. So we can also use PowerShell to run Python script and also Bash. As long as it has a shell environment, we're able to run different script for various reasons. Now, for the VBA, the Virtual Basic for Application and Macros, VBA is used in Microsoft applications like Word to automate specific tasks and write macros. So macro documentation can cause some damages to our system, so we gotta be careful and we have to watch out for those. And as you complete the rest, so exercise 4 gives you the explanation of what those things are. It doesn't necessarily brought you to write the actual script, but it introduced you to PowerShell and some of the details about Python and running Bash. However, in programming classes or scripting classes, sometime in networking classes, you might experience some scripting exercises that will help you also related to networking or security. And I do teach CIS30C, which is Python for security, and it requires you to have network knowledge along with at least the basic Python knowledge. And the Python programming certificate includes from the intro to the advanced level in different areas of Python. So if you're interested in learning more about scripting, you can sign up to take those classes. But you have to meet the requirement in order to attempt those classes. So this concludes my video for the lab. I hope I give you a good overview of what you will be doing, but some of you might choose to experience it. And if you have any questions, please let me know. And I hope to see you in the next video for next week.